Hi, welcome to a Roboflow training movie. In this training movie, I will explain a little bit about how to interrupt the loop of a workflow. So I created a little workflow here, and this is a hot folder workflow. Now, with any type of workflow, you can define moments in time that a workflow can be executed, and you can even have multiple moments in time. So if you say, okay, I want it at 6 a.m., you can say, okay, and I want it also at 13, and you can specify a big list. Let's say you want to run this every 15 minutes and then stop at a certain moment in time. Let's say you want to run it from 6 a.m. till 3 p.m. every hour. Then you can just specify all the moments in time, and automatically it will stop after the last time you specified. However, if you want this workflow to run every minute and check something quickly and then stop, yeah, it's a little bit unrealistic to specify an interval of every minute in here. That would be a list of maybe 1,000 entries. So then usually we use something like, okay, I want to run it every 300 seconds. It's not every 300 seconds. It means it runs and then it executes whatever it finds, and then it when it's finished, it sleeps 300 seconds. Now, if you want this workflow to stop at a certain moment in time, you can say, okay, I want this, for instance, to stop at 9 p.m. at night, and then, or sorry, this is 8 p.m. at night. So this will run until 8 p.m. It's not exactly 8 p.m. If 3 minutes before 8 p.m. it starts running, it finds 10,000 files, and it runs for 6 hours, then it will be running long after the 8 p.m. There is a solution for that too. You will see that in a moment. But first of all, this gives you at least the opportunity to make sure that a Roboflow doesn't start after a certain time anymore. So that's one of the ways to control that. Another way to control how long a workflow runs, of how much it processes, is to play with a couple of parameters, a couple of advanced parameters. You can add a parameter which is called max files to process. And then you can say, look, in every loop, it doesn't matter how many files you find. As soon as you find, for instance, 100 files, you start processing them. And then when you're finished, you go to sleep. Even if there's more, you perform your sleep, whatever is defined as your interval, and then in the next loop you'll do the next 100. So this is also a way you can control that a process doesn't run too long. So that is also a solution. However, this only works on a hot folder workflow, not on any other type of workflow. So in any other type of workflow, this will not give the wanted result. Also, something to control, but it has nothing to do with interruption, is that if you have a hot folder workflow, you can set the default behavior of it is that when it has processed a file, that it deletes it. Well, you can disable this functionality with this parameter. However, this has nothing to do with the flow of the workflow, and be careful. This means that the next time this workflow runs, it will find exactly the same files since the workflow didn't remove them. But it can have other purposes. Or you can use it in a test phase where you want to see how the processing goes, but don't want to touch the files yet that it is processing. Good. Then we come to another way of interrupting. You have a simple action that is called interrupt current process, but interrupt current process only works, and so here we have it, exit current loop. This is the one, exit current loop process. This only works in a loop of an action, which means something like any of the actions that you find in here that create a loop. So for instance, you have something like process files of a catalog batch, process files of a catalog process, process related records. Those are action loops, and those action loops can be interrupted by that action. Just a reminder, when it executes that interruption instruction, it does not stop the script. It does not interrupt the loop. It just flags the loop that it will not do a next step in the loop. So if you have any instructions underneath it, it will still execute them. So it's just flagging it to interrupt the loop as soon as it has finished processing the instructions within that loop. So it's always a good idea to have this as a last instruction of the loop. Okay, then still this is interrupting a loop, so this is not influencing anything with the actual processing of the files found or the records found by the workflow itself in the workflow loop. So there is also an opportunity to interrupt that. There could be two reasons why you would want to interrupt. Maybe you want to make sure that a certain process is finished completely before, for instance, Roboflow is restarted. Imagine you have a daily restart at 1 a.m. and you have workflows that are cataloging, but maybe some cataloging processes are cataloging very big files like movies, or they're uploading it to a vault or uploading to the cloud, to Amazon S3. Those processes can take a long time sometimes for big files. And you want to be 100% sure that there is no such cataloging process running when Roboflow is stopped by an external script. If you have a daily restart of the Roboflow service, then that forcefully interrupts whatever it's doing. So if you are in the middle of a cataloging process, that could break something. So it could be smart to have something in your script that stops the scripts individually before it reaches that point. So in this example here, I have configured a variable which I call moment to stop after. So it tells me that whenever it comes to the instruction that tests this variable, that it will, if the time is past this moment, that it will stop. I defined here that, so when the workflow stops, it will store this variable with the date time of today, year, month, day, and the time I really want it to stop. So I prefix it with the day to be sure that if it's 1 a.m., that it considers 1 a.m. being past midnight, that it is 1 a.m. is later than 23:59. Otherwise, you could just specify the hours, but then if you go past midnight, then the hours go back to 1 or 0, and then of course it wouldn't detect. So it's important to include the date in this test. And then here in this instruction, I pick up that value. So I'm storing a variable called time to die. It's prefixed by global because it needs to be persistent across all processes. And then I pick up this variable. The semicolon means here, if this variable doesn't exist yet, if it's null, then it is going to pick up the initial value from the parameters. So that's how it can get that value. And that's how this gets stored in the script. Now, if I then in time to die, I have a date time kind of thing. If there was no moment to stop defined, then it will initiate it to 99999, which means that it will never stop. Then what it does, it tests if that time to die is smaller than the actual date, so if we are past, if we are after the time that we wanted to stop, then it means that we want to stop. And then we have here a special instruction, which is a global variable that I'm storing called break loop. And I'm saying break now. And by storing this, it will automatically interrupt the flow for when it is running. It will completely stop the workflow, and the workflow will not restart at all. And so this is how you can force a workflow to stop. And as I said, this can be for reason of a time, but you could also build this in if an error happens. Maybe if you have a couple of files that belong together in the workflow and one of them fail, and you say, okay, if this fails, then I need to stop. Or for instance, if you're connecting to a REST API and this REST API requires a token, and for some reason halfway through the process you have 20 files to upload, and halfway through the process you get an error that the token is expired. If this workflow of yours does not take care of refreshing that token, you could say, okay, I'm stopping the process because I first need to make sure that the other any other workflow that refreshes my token does the job before I just fail all these files from uploading. So that's basically what this is able to do. So this way you can make this happen, and you can protect your workflow, and you can build in. If you have, for instance, now this is before midnight, but if, for instance, you're saying, okay, this workflow starts, for instance, at 7 p.m. at night, and this is an evening workflow, and I want it to stop at 7 a.m., then you have to specify this instead of this, because then you want it not to, because your time frame will be then 0700, but if it starts at 7 p.m. it is already past this moment, so the first time it tries to run, it will stop after the first file or record that it has processed. But if you then specify, instead of the normal date time plus 1, so this is adding 1 day to the date now, then it generates tomorrow, and then you get tomorrow 7 a.m. and then it will stop tomorrow 7 a.m. So that's how you can solve that particular problem. Now we get to our final challenge. Our final challenge is, what if you want to run this workflow from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m.? How can I make the workflow start at 7 p.m.? I explained before that you can say, okay, exclamation mark, make sure that it doesn't start when Roboflow is restarted during the night. You could do a restart of your Roboflow at 7 p.m., but that has an impact on all your workflows, of course. So if for some reason that is not an option, as I mentioned before, you could say, okay, 7 p.m. and then you specify every moment in time after that you want it running till 7 a.m. And if this is an hour, each hour, and that's fine, because you can do 19, 20, it's 10, it's 12 entries and you're done. But as I said before, if this needs to run every minute after midnight, after 12 p.m., 7 p.m., then it's much more difficult, because then you get a huge list of intervals, which doesn't make it very useful. So what you could do is, imagine that you want to run it every minute, is specify the minute. And like we have a moment to stop after, we can also define a moment to start after. So what I can say here is, okay, new, and I can add a variable, and we call it start after. And now we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to define the moment in time that we want this workflow to start. And so we are going to say, okay, during the night, this is having a nightly restart, but I want this workflow to start at 7 p.m. So then I'm going to define it like this, 7 p.m. And now I have a moment to start after. What I'm going to do is I'm copy-paste this part, and your processing needs to be in the middle. So let's call this the processing, and this is just a dummy. And this is where your normal action scripts go. What you do is you can call this, instead of time to die, you called it time to live, or time to start. That makes maybe more sense. Times to start. Make sure you pick it up here as well. And here it's moment to start after. There we go. And now here we have to do the other way around. And this way we make sure that it always starts if this variable were not to be defined in your script. And this is to start. Okay. Then we are testing time to start instead of time to die, and we're not saying smaller but bigger or greater. And there we go. And it has to be greater than date time, and then we call it test if time to start. And so if it's we have to keep it smaller because we have to interrupt each time the workflow when it's smaller. When it's bigger, we're allowing it to run, so it has to stay on smaller. So it's time to start, and we're doing break loop. Or you could even not do a break loop and put your full processing inside here and change it to greater. And then that is another solution. Then you don't even have to use this interruption instruction. You could very simply just say, okay, I'm putting this, which is my processing, inside this, and instead of smaller, I make the test on greater. And that is a solution too. But what we accomplish with this is that now we define, and if we define them both, we'll say, okay, and this guy will maybe, Roboflow has a nightly restart, or let's keep this here, a nightly restart, and this workflow will start running, but it will not process. So you can say every 60 seconds, it's checking, is there any files? It will make the inventory of the files, or if there's any files, it will find the files. But as soon as it starts processing them, it starts processing the first one, then it's going to say, okay. And that's why it's better to use also with the start here, the interruption, because otherwise it's going to run over all files and do nothing with them, but that's not a good idea, because then you also have to make sure that you have this parameter here in place, otherwise it will still delete the file. So it's better to interrupt. So what you're saying is it will start processing the first file, it will do the test in time, it will say break, and then if it's too early, if it's 7 a.m. In the morning, if the daily restart of Roboflow is 7 a.m. in the morning, it will say, okay, is it 7 a.m. in the morning? Is this past 7 p.m.? No, so it will not start, and it will only start at 7 a.m. 7 p.m. So that is maybe still a problem that we could struggle with. So you could do here exactly the same. You could say, okay, I want this workflow to start after 7 p.m. of the previous day. Boom, 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 boom. Yeah, and then it's going to die. Yeah, so here you would have to do the same thing. Since if it starts today at 7 p.m., this workflow was started at midnight, for instance. And at midnight it started and it says, okay, am I past 1 p.m.? If the workflow does today, it's going to say, is it past 7 p.m.? No, so I'm not gonna run. That's not what I want, because I want it to run during the night from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. So I want to run it from 7 p.m. yesterday. And so this is going to be -1. So if this started at midnight, it's going to say from 7 p.m. yesterday till 7 a.m. Today. I want this to run. And so at 7 a.m. I start, and it says, am I after 7 a.m. of tomorrow? And this is maybe not necessary then in that case, because we're working, because it's restarted at midnight, of past midnight. It's in this day. And so in this day, I want it to stop at 7 a.m. So that's good. The +1 is only necessary if you're restarting Roboflow the day before. If you're restarting the day before, then it needs to be running till the next day. So that's what you have to really consider. If your time frame of stopping is early in the morning, then you have to make sure that you calculate that into is it early in the morning of tomorrow, or is it early in the morning of today? And if Roboflow is starting today, then it's early in the morning today. You want it to stop. I know it's a little bit complex, but you should just play around with it and you will see that it will work out perfectly. What is important, that is that this is now an example that this parameter is here, but usually this parameter will not be there. What you need to do is you need, in case you are saying, I don't want the workflow yet to be processing, just to be 100% sure, you should here copy, paste in the beginning of the workflow. You should say, oh, good, paste. Close this. You should say here paste, and in the beginning of the workflow you should here create this global parameter that says that you are normally processing the files as it should be, that they can be deleted at the end, but copy. Whenever we're interrupting here the process, paste, that it should not delete the file. So here it should be false. And so this way you're protecting the fact that you start processing a file, you see, okay, it's not my time to do so, I interrupt the action script, but the action script is just a part of the workflow, and then it would afterwards still delete the file. So it's important to have this here saying, hey, don't delete the file, I didn't really process it. Here it's different. Here it can delete the file because you're doing at the end of the script, so the processing of that particular file or that particular record. You don't, if your workflow is a hot collection workflow, you don't need to add this parameter, and this is only a parameter that belongs in workflow a hot folder workflow. Okay, so thank you for joining this training movie. I hope this helps you control the flow of your workflow.